let people get a chance to sit down. Well, good afternoon. This is a joint presentation between the Open University in the UK and the University of Edinburgh at the UK. Can I just get a sense of how many people here know about the Open University? Oh, pretty much. So my slides will go very quickly. The plan behind this talk is Tim and I were colleagues at the Open University for about 19 years. So the Open University taught him everything he knows about distance and open learning. So what we thought might be quite nice is to do a presentation for you where I give you a quick skim over the top of some of the key Open University principles and a little bit of history. And then Tim is going to take over and give you a sense of how he has developed the strategy for online masters at Edinburgh University. So I'm going to talk about open and distance learning pedagogy. I'm not going to talk about the Open University in a great deal of detail, but I have colleagues here. Hannah here I'll mention her later in the slides. She's very willing to talk to Empty about any of our recent developments, and I would commend to you a session tomorrow. I don't know if Matthew Harrington's here. I can't see him. Oh, hi. There's a very good session tomorrow on Thursday where you'll hear a bit more about how Open edX has been used in the development of courses. So I commend Matthew and team to you if you want to find out more about that. In the course of the talk, we will talk about pedagogy. Tim has a strong notion of what the ecology of e-learning is and how that's influenced things. He's got an interesting set of case studies developed at the OU over the past 10 or 12 years. And what he's been thinking about, particularly for this talk, is a sort of multi-directional flow between ideas developed in parts of the university about MOOCs, which in some cases have led to the development of serious online master's programs, and vice versa. Sometimes his master's programs have spawned, if that's the right word, examples of very interesting MOOCs. And we'll try and pull things together for you at the end of the 35 minutes and talk about how this all hangs together as some interesting ideas about open and distance learning pedagogy. So to begin with, you all know this, most of you raised your hands. The Open University was invented in 1969. It has a fabulous mission. If you ever wonder whether you're open or not, I commend to you our vision statement, which is open to people, places, methods, and ideas. Can't say fairer than that, I think. And the really unique thing about the Open University is that we do not require any entrance qualifications. So we really are open to people. You want to study with the Open University, you can. Of course, people take up the option of studying with us who already have some kind of qualification, but I think the last time I looked at the figures, about 38% of people on our undergraduate courses did not have enough to qualify for entrance in a conventional university. We are the university of choice for students with disabilities, a large proportion of our students, 21,000. The overall numbers for the university is something like 170,000 if you include about 40,000 students who are in programs that we validate rather than directly studying with us. We're the biggest university in the UK, but we do have a significant number of students studying overseas for undergraduate qualifications. As I said before, we got into online and open quite early. The aspect of the Open University which wasn't open was we asked people to pay fees. Not very big fees, but you had to pay something to join our courses. And thanks to a grant from the Hewlett Foundation back 10 years ago, we got enough money to put onto a website freely available a third of the course content that we had at the time. The impetus from the Hewlett Foundation was that they wanted us to for good quality learning resources to be available for learners who wouldn't otherwise have access. And from that point, we've developed an OpenLearn website. The numbers are quite staggering. If you want to hear more about that, Hannah's your lady for telling you how that developed. How are we successful if we support learners who have no background? Well, we have a supported open learning model that requires good quality learning materials to be available for you to learn either individually or with others, different sorts of resources, and also a really thought through way of supporting learners as they study with us. So we have a supportive open learning model, and the only remark I will make about OU strategy at the moment is we're really looking hard at that model to think about how we can make it personalised, supported open learning. So that's the direction of travel. As I said, online working, no entry requirements, complete range of courses from short free online courses to paid for masters, professional doctorates and PhDs. It's a bit more expensive. I won't go into politics, but that's the UK for you. And we have a lot of MOOCs, and we have our own MOOC platform, FutureLearn. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just going to talk at a very top level of what we know from an experience of about 40 years teaching in an open online fashion. The key thing we know is distance learning pedagogies work. We've had to work at it. We've had to think, how do you provide practical experiences in the lab for students? We had to think about how motivation rises and falls as you go through a degree. But one of the things we've discovered, and before there was learning analytics, we did learning analytics and discovered that support for students really influences retention. One of the holy grails for anybody working in open and distance learning, you can do assessment this way, can be supported by online systems. But for me, the main message is quality. The quality process is all I think we inherited from our exposure. All our teaching materials were, even before the advent of the internet, very publicly available in bookshops. Our academics were exposed to the nation on BBC television programmes, so that there was this learning was in the open, and the materials that we produced were in the open, so that we had to be really careful about developing quality assurance processes. And Anne this morning talked about the responsibility of the provider rather than the platform. I think that's what he meant. That's certainly true, but that takes work, and it's not the work of an individual. In terms of authentic activities, it makes sense to be active. As Anant was telling us this morning, had a particular model of interpolated activities. But I would make a plea for authentic activities. You need to engage the learner with activities that feel like they matter and feel that they are taking them towards their goal of knowing about a subject and becoming a scientist or something else. We've got lots of things to say about accessibility. I won't go into too much of them here, but I think our current trend towards personalisation really responds to the sense that we have that even in large scale online learning systems, you can have personalisation that makes a difference. And Tim is going to tell you how all that matters.
Thank you very much, Eileen. And it's nice that Eileen and I are talking together. The University of Edinburgh is very successful with MOOCs. It's very successful with masters. And without being arrogant, I think I worked for 19 years for the Open University before I moved to the University of Edinburgh. The vice principal in charge of implementing this area, Jeff Hayward, at the University of Edinburgh, came from the Open University. The vice principal in charge of all our arts, humanities and social sciences came from the Open University. So very, very strong influence. I'm interested in ecology. I've been doing this sort of work in e-learning since 1970. I'm very old. A question that I got interested in was, are MOOCs killing anything in the e-learning world? The short answer is they aren't. And another thing I was interested in was, can you still hear me? Yeah, okay. How big is a MOOC? And 100 MOOCs. MOOCs are bigger than I thought they might be. 100 MOOCs, if you look at regular credit standards, is about the size of an undergraduate degree. 25 MOOCs. Huh? Huh? Oh, okay. A master's degree is about 25 MOOCs. I'm quite interested in minnows, this idea that 5 minutes from a MOOC, 5 minutes of a video is an interesting thing, and Ant talked about it, a number of us have talked about it. And I was very disappointed, because if you try to take a fish model for this area, then if you look at an undergraduate degree, well, it's 100,000 minnows. And that, if you weigh it, it's about a baby killer whale. Baby killer whale is quite small. I was hoping it would be a minnow to a proper big whale. But it is interesting. We are talking about 5 orders of magnitude between a minnow and an undergraduate course. So we've been doing online masters in Edinburgh in earnest for about 15 years. It's been a slow build. About a third of our postgraduate provision at Edinburgh now, about 3,000 students are on online courses, and I'm going to tell you a couple of flagship ones of those. Much more recently, obviously, 2012, we got into MOOCs. MOOCs is a bit more sizable, about 2 million, a bit more than 2 million people actively engaged in MOOCs. We're heading towards 50 MOOCs. To give you a bit of context back, we've got about 80 online masters, 50 MOOCs. Quite a big community. We've got about 250 people who work in the university who are engaged with MOOCs in different ways. And we use 3 main platforms. We use Coursera, which is where most of our stuff is, and then we use FutureLearn a bit more than we use edX. But we also have purpose-built stuff. We use Blackboard Learn. We use Google Tools. We use a whole pile, a very heterogeneous approach. So we are not committed to one platform. Quite the reverse. We are determinedly committed to multiple platforms. We don't know which will survive. We do know that none of the platforms is perfect. And so, for example, if you're very bothered about mobility, you ought to be on FutureLearn. If you're very bothered about tailoring, you should probably be building it in HTML with some pile of simulation tools. So quite a lot on the go. This is probably our flagship in terms of MOOCs to masters. We have, with philosophy, we've now got 4 MOOCs. The Introduction to Philosophy MOOC is the most popular MOOC, not in the world, or it used to be the most popular MOOC in the world. The Open University now has the most popular MOOC in the world, which is English as a second language from the British Council on FutureLearn, but it's the most popular MOOC on Coursera, which in turn is the most popular platform. More than 1 million enrollments. So that MOOC really had a big impact. 1 million learners. It generated a very good textbook. It generated another MOOC called Philosophy and the Sciences, which generated another textbook. Generated another MOOC called Intellectual Humility, which generated another textbook, and generated about £500,000 in grant money, which generated another MOOC, which generated a book and which brought in another 1.5 million. So we're pretty happy, really. And these 4 MOOCs, which have produced £2 million in grant money, and 4 books, have also produced 2 online masters. So that was a very interesting impact. An incredibly successful MOOC generates 3 more MOOCs, generates 4 books, generates £2 million of money, and generates 2 online masters. A very nice curve, and it's quite clear here the direction of travel in the University of Edinburgh was MOOCs to masters. And very good widening participation. This MOOC, most MOOCs have older people, but this MOOC also has attracted a lot of school students who are interested in what philosophy in university is. It's attracted people from low income. We're particularly pleased with the way that it has gone into prisons. And we have people who are, and we think it is very good for people in prisons as they're preparing to leave to study things. So 3 of our MOOCs have a non-trivial presence in prisons. We have one on critical thinking, we have one on global challenging, and we have this, and we think that is a very important contribution. So we have people in philosophy now publishing in the Journal of Correction about how you use philosophy, online philosophy, to help prisoners in prison. So very nice and very, very enthusiastic philosophers. It's raised our profile. I mean, Edinburgh's profile didn't really need to be raised in philosophy. David Hume, Adam Smith, a whole pile of people, including some very famous contemporary philosophers, but it's raised the profile. But it's also been very good for public participation. Another curve which is quite different, and is I think one of the other reasons why we've been successful, is we have for a long time had a very successful online masters in online masters. Basically a very good masters using e-learning about e-learning. It's trained lots of professionals. I encourage you to go and look at it. It's recently, this online masters has generated a hybrid MOOC. This is a MOOC on social methods, social science methods in digital education, which can also be used for credit in the online masters, and also has moved across to it's also used in an on-campus masters in social sciences. So this is hybrid in 2 ways. It's hybrid between the MOOC and the masters, and hybrid between online and not online. And the folks, Sian Bain and her colleagues, very, very inventive. So Edinburgh is one of the leaders. People use different names. We call them teacher bots. That is, when you've got a big MOOC, like the philosophy MOOC with 100,000 learners, you really need to use the machine learning techniques so that you can say, here's a frequently asked question about ontology or whatever, and we automate the answer. So something good to look at in Edinburgh is the teacher bots, which of course are being used across the piece now. A lot of our stuff is self-reflective. So we have a digital media design MSc in our College of Art, which relates particularly to things like animation, relates to online methods. Then going in the direction of online masters to MOOC, we've had a long presence online teaching veterinary science, and then we generated a very nice little MOOC called Do You Have What It Takes to Be a Vet? And of course, if you take the MOOC, then what are we expecting you to do? We're expecting you to take the online masters in some aspect of veterinary science. And that has generated various ones. Recently, we have a very nice online MSc all around the world in animal welfare. Very nice structure. One of my points is that when you've got an ecology like we have of postgraduate and MOOCs, there are a whole range of exit points. So if you look at this online masters, you can exit with 20 credits, which is about the size of a micro masters, or you can exit with 60 credits and have a certificate, or 120 credits and have a diploma, or do a bit of research as well and have and have a full master's degree. And very nice pattern of flexibility, different routes, cat and dog welfare, equine behaviour, and also very nice models, supported a multi-model for dissertations, and lots of very nice impact of the students who are taking this in different places. Edinburgh is very strong on environmental issues, and where there's something where we reach out to the world, and obviously we reach out to the world for our Global Academy in environment, then one of the ways that is supported is by an online masters. We have, in terms of our global academies, and the Edinburgh Global Academies, there are 5 of them, their primary mechanism is online masters teaching in developing countries. So the Global Health Academy has online masters in infectious diseases, produced in partnership with colleagues in places like Uganda and Tanzania, with support of agencies like the Gates Foundation, and very much outward looking from our very strong medical base. And again, if you look at that, online masters, it has different exits, depending. You might be a paramedical, or you might be somebody who's already a doctor. And really nice dissertation topics. Another of our flagships, we teach, and are quite well known for, won prizes for, we teach online surgery. We've been doing that for about 11 years. to study surgery with us online. It's a partnership with the Royal College of Surgeons, which is annoyingly older than the University of Edinburgh, 1505. In order to do that, you have to be a surgeon, you have to be in a hospital that allows you to do surgery, and then you have to come back and be checked by these. You have to come to Edinburgh and be checked by both the university for your intellectual competence and the College of Surgeons for your practical competence. So this is an online master's where coming to Edinburgh for a couple of weeks is an absolute requirement. We really don't want to say we think this person is an advanced surgeon unless we have met them. This is very successful. In our world, we're talking now 500 currently. This is our strongest online program. Won an award from the Queen, steadily growing. And interestingly, it took quite a while. Started with about 20, we've now got about 500, curve continuing nicely. And interesting to see, this is a slide, I like this slide. It says, successful open and distance learning must be contextual, active, collaborative, flexible, positive and supportive, enjoyable and engaging. And you might think that slide was written by a sophisticated educational technologist like Professor Scanlon, who's the Regius Professor of Open Education. He wasn't. That slide was written by the Regius Professor of Surgery. Now, you could not be more establishment than the Regius Professor of Surgery, who, as well as talking about surgery, is talking about these nice educational principles. I'm very, very pleased with this. I never imagined we could have an online master's in history. Why have we got an online master's in history? Because the historians know they're more practical than the philosophers. And when they saw that the philosophers could do it, they did it. They've got more than 100 students around the world. I particularly like this slide, which is they got students around the world to post their study spaces. And so you have this really quite nice set of environments around the world. We're boring, we're conventional, as well as being exciting and innovative. So being boring and conventional, obviously we have an online program in data science, technology and innovation. It's a trope, I apologise, but we're forced into this. It's a cultural conformity. If MIT's got one, Stanford's got one, Edinburgh's got to have one too. We've got one, it's quite a nice one. It's driven from data science particularly. It's got a certificate with it. It's got 5 participants. It's got physics. It's got informatics, which is what we call computer science at Edinburgh. It's got social and political science in for some of the statistical methods. Edinburgh was the place that invented, didn't only have Thomas Bayes, who you may have heard of, but also the first statistical package, computer statistical package in the social sciences was developed at Edinburgh. So actually our political and social scientists are really very adept. So they're appropriate partners here. And a very nice pattern taking us into things like medical informatics and into our doctoral training centre. What are our challenges? In order to put together the material for this talk and the talk some of you heard me give on Monday, I emailed all 50 of our MOOC teams and all 80 of our online masters teams, and a few of them said some version of, well, a problem with things like Coursera or, I have to say, edX is they're weird. That is, for somebody in a developing world, it's Western, educated, institutional, rich, democratic stuff. It doesn't look like our stuff. It's weird stuff. And there is a cultural issue. I mean, the Edinburgh way of trying to solve the cultural issue is to work in partnership with Macquarie University, to work in partnership with close partnership with universities in South Africa, and so on. Other challenge, how to tell, we've got a very nice MOOC on the Higgs boson. But it's hard, it's very difficult. There's a very nice comic book called How to Tell a Proton from a Crouton. Crouton, by the way, is what you put on your soup. I prefer them when they cook with garlic. But there is an issue of how do you teach really, really hard stuff? And the way our particle physicists have decided to do it is by saying it's really, really hard. And there's 7 billion of you out there, we don't expect that many of you, and we're going to do it slowly and steadily. But there's an issue teaching hard stuff. There is comparison shopping, an issue particularly when you've got a pile of different platforms and lots of MOOCs with the same name. And some people will start 4 or 5 MOOCs with the same name at the same time. And then they will decide after a week or two which they like the best, and they'll stop the other 4. That really makes a mess of your learning analytics, because they were not studying, they were doing something quite different. They were doing comparison shopping. It's like saying your brand of socks is a failure because somebody looked at them and didn't buy them. So lots of people are going to look at your socks. Some people are going to buy them. Issue of training the tutors, recapturing open. The Open University has got wonderful philosophy, rhetoric about it. We need to get back to that. Obviously, there's an issue of software rot, and there's an issue of platform obsolescence. But it's very clear, a struggle for Edinburgh now is we have got platforms, homemade platforms, were developed 10 years ago. The operating systems those platforms supposed to exist don't exist anymore. So there's all sorts of platform obsolescence and software rot, and I speak as a computer scientist, does seem to be a real thing. You don't use software for a year and then you try and use it and it stopped working. Nothing seems to have changed except it's not working anymore. Learner preferences. Learners are very different, and here are 7 dimensions on which they differ. What is their definition of success or exit? And we now design for different exits. The learner is there for interest, the learner who wants a micro, wants a MOOC credit, the learner who wants a full master's. They differ with what sort of group size. Some learners are happiest with a group size of 1. Some learners are happiest with a group size of 100, so they can hide at the edge. What sort of mentor, what sort of peer interaction they work with, how much privacy they need. Do they need a cohort? Quite a lot of learners really do want a cohort. Some learners don't. And do they need, I think one of the attractive things about edX, which is also a feature of Future Learn, is a very strong developing notion of how are we going to support communities of learners. I think that is really very important. And then there are blessings. I'll come back to this on the last slide. I think for me the key blessing, and it's an Open University style blessing, is learner autonomy. But there is our ability to combine pedagogies. People used to be quite hard line about what sort of cognitive theory of learning did they support, or were they into drill and practice. Now people are, it's like fusion cooking. They take a bit of Skinner, they take a bit of Piaget, a bit of Vygotsky, mix it all up. And there's no harm in that, actually. I think there's a lot of good in that. There's an issue of aligning with technologies, which I think is a real plus. Diversity of access. One of the things that's pleased me the most about the Edinburgh MOOCs is that 3 of our MOOCs are actively used in prisons. Our MOOCs are used in secondary schools in poor parts of town. Our MOOCs are used by clubs of old people who are doing it for hobby. These types of access, very nice. PhD students get a lot of benefit. Your PhD students, it gives them an extremely interesting thing to do. Learning to tutor philosophy to an incredibly heterogeneous audience, some of whom are high school kids who don't know very much, some of whom are retired professors of philosophy, you learn an awful lot if your job is to deal with an online group like that. For us at Edinburgh, it has been a tremendous benefit in building reputation. If you Google astrobiology, we come top. It's very unfair because these Americans at NASA, they have many more astrobiologists than we do. But we've got a jolly good MOOC, and they don't. So we come absolute top, above the Wikipedia entry. So the number, equine health, which is fair. We are world leaders in the health of horses. And so it's fair that we're number 1, but we're also number 1 in astrobiology, which is a MOOC phenomenon. And obviously the international communities. When I talk to any of the folks, the 130 different emails I send out, pretty much everybody comes back and saying, and we've got students studying this in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, we have 2 autonomous groups of astrobiologists who came from the astrobiology MOOC. So that is very nice. This is where we were 3 years ago. We're about 50 masters with a population of about 2,000, about 750,000 MOOC learners, almost nothing in open studies. This is where we are very comfortably going in 2025. All I can tell you is we'll be there earlier. I will certainly have 10,000 students studying at a postgraduate level online remotely from the university. We'll certainly be in the hundreds of MOOCs. We have tremendous enthusiasm, and our open studies, that is for interest stuff we do, will be dominated. So And this is not wild predictions. This is you just plot the graphs of where we are at the moment, and you can see that the University of Edinburgh will comfortably be in that position. And then lastly, I do think autonomy is the big virtue. The ability for learners to identify their own goals, to identify their preferred learning partners, identify their teaching mentor guide, see what language or visualization they're using. I mean, one of the interesting things about MOOC learners is how much stuff they do that isn't on the MOOC they're doing. MOOC learners will typically, they may be in a Facebook group, they may be in LinkedIn, they may be using a database of some description. So they can do that. They can choose their route to the goals, and I think one of our jobs is to make sure there are multiple routes for the multiple types of learners, define their personal success criteria, have reflective meta strategies. And I have to say, Eileen is an honest woman. She does a lot of work. I'm a parasite. I'm a head of a university. So everything that I have said to you from the University of Edinburgh has been stolen from someone else. Eileen has mentioned a few of her colleagues there, but you'll see, I told you, I don't know if you believe me, that we sent 130 emails. I didn't use all the material. I think about 5 of these are Open University people that Eileen is referring to. The rest are me. You've got 5 minutes. You may ask questions or you may attack. Eileen is Scottish. If you attack, she'll attack you back. I'm Irish German. Half of me will attack you back and the other half will be sort of respectful, the German bit. But I will attack you back. Go for it.
Super impressive. You highlighted a few courses early on that were hits and they generated cash and then you used that investment to fund future work. I'm curious, as you step back and look at the entire program, how would you characterize your original investment? And are you currently generating cash from this online programs, or are you consuming cash, and how do you think about your investment strategy?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, to start with, if we go back to 2002 and the development of the online masters, this was essentially professional schools like medicine, education, law, veterinary medicine, who wanted to reach out another way. And those enterprises are self-sustaining. The online masters have fees which generate income, which pay for the extra staff. When we went into the MOOC world in 2012, we decided to just go for it. That required an investment. Our estimate is that a MOOC learner costs us about $1. So having gone to a bit more than 2 million MOOC learners who did something non-trivial, we reckon we've spent about $2 million. The MOOCs have definitely not generated $2 million. On the other hand, we've generated more than $2 million in grants just in philosophy from the successful MOOCs. So we feel very happy about it. What I'm roughly expecting is, if you look at our 3,000 online master's students, I'm expecting the courses that we currently have to about double in size. So that'll take us to 6,000. And then we have a few areas where we think we can comfortably get more than 1,000 students on the same online masters. And we're quite happy within the university to invest about $1 million in an online masters. That seems to be a perfectly reasonable level of investment. It's probably a bit less than the Open University would invest, although it may be what the Open University invests now. It's a bit less than what people used to invest in distance learning, but it's about right. A very successful online master's course, ab initio, $1 million has got to be fine when you look at the course fees you can charge. So we feel quite comfortable about it. Certainly the online masters are looking after themselves. At the moment, perhaps we're cross-subsidizing the MOOCs. On the other hand, we don't see a student come into online veterinary postgraduate now who hasn't done a MOOC. One of our MOOCs in online veterinary. So the MOOCs are paying for themselves probably as a form of marketing and as a form of getting grants. Very good question. Any other questions? Yes, please.
For some of the other programs, like philosophy or more humanities ones, how do you get the instructors to be open to adopting it? and
How do you get them to?
to adopt the online space.
Well, this will sound stupid. I mean, in 2012 I wanted to do 6. I thought we'd do two in the arts and humanities, 2 in medicine and veterinary medicine, and 2 in science and engineering. And I thought, oh, philosophy would be nice. So I said to the philosophers, do a philosophy MOOC, please. They didn't do the philosophy MOOC I wanted them to, but they did do a philosophy MOOC. I said to the astrobiologists, God, that astrobiology is so cool, do an astrobiology MOOC. And the astrobiologist said, all right. So I asked 6 groups of people, and they all said yes, which is very nice of them. Now, because that was so visibly successful, I mean, I had the most positive university senate the University of Edinburgh has ever had. We have many more people wanting to do MOOCs than we can support. So we will by the end of this year we'll be up to 50. If we had more resources, there's many more academics wish to do it than we can support. But to start with, it was, I think, because I asked people really nicely. We'd better stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ponme señal de DVD de proyector.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, great, thank you.
So you know about 10 minutes from the end, so you can start wrapping up, and then 5 minutes when you want to be switching to questions.
Sure.
Is there anything?
You want to use some audio in your slide?
Sorry?
Some audio.
Audio, no need, but can I?
It's possible to switch this screen.
Yeah.
wireless microphone.
I don't mind, whatever works for you better.
It's good for us, 2 ways.
Okay, so I'll stay here. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Okay. My name is Eran Raviv, and I'm the head of Campus IL, which is Israel's national initiative for digital learning. There's a famous saying in Yiddish, which is German Jew dialect, that says, "Man plan, God laughs." It actually sounds better in Yiddish, so I'm going to try that. Wenn der Mensch tracht, God lacht. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to discuss what could go wrong in MOOCs according to my and the Campus IL team experience. So this is Campus IL team. We're a small startup within Digital Israel, which is part of a national project in the Ministry of Equality of the government of Israel, aiming to digitally transform the public sector in Israel. So we had the privilege during the last year to experiment. Our vision is to change the way education is delivered in Israel. We want to offer free courses and knowledge, academic, general, and vocational education for every citizen in Israel. And in order to do that, we've partnered with edX, and we have a platform that is based on the open edX technology. And like I said, we had a great privilege. So our site is not online yet. It's under the radar. We're now experimenting for 18 months with several thousands of learners in order to get the best results in terms of pedagogic models, in terms of technology, in terms of courses and learning paths. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about what is Campus IL vision, and then dive into a few things that we've learned during the last year. So our focus is on 4 different audiences or verticals: university students, underprivileged populations, civil servants, and high school students. In academia, we aim for 3 different tracks. Introductory courses, we vision that in 3 years from today, everyone in Israel would be able to consume academic courses and get credits for free and better choose their track of studies. A phenomenon that we have in Israel is a major dropout in the first year of academic institutes. And one of the reasons is that you don't know where you're going. So if you have the option to try a few things, you could have a better fit. Flagship courses is another track we target for the non-academic population, very similar to what the president of the Edinburgh University was talking about. And another track is academic teachers training courses. We want to improve teachers in Israel. So this is one audience. Another one, which is super important, like I said, we're part of the Ministry of Social Equality in Israel, is to decrease the barriers the underserved communities in Israel have for education and employment. You can see 6 examples of courses that are currently under development and will be uploaded to the platform next year. I'll just share with you that today, if someone wants to take the SAT prep course, he needs to pay around probably 2,000 euros. And we're going to offer that for free. So it's really a game-changing in that terms of the underprivileged communities. Third audience is the public servants. We have 3 tracks, vocational trainings. We've launched 2 months ago, C++ programming course for the IDF. Professional development, this is actually a course that was launched yesterday for math teachers in high schools. And another very important track is the citizen awareness and useful knowledge, which is about changing the behavior of the public around core issues of society. This is an example of a course that will be launched next month around legal guardians. There are 70,000 legal guardians in Israel, and most of them don't know their rights and duties. So this is a course that will help change that, hopefully. And lastly, high school students. This is the project I love the most. So for the last 70 years, students, high school students in Israel, study very hard throughout 12 years, and then they need to take one condensed exam at the end of 12th grade. And that's not the best measurement and evaluation of knowledge as I see that, and we're going to change that. Next year, we're piloting, this is the course in history of the 20th century. Instead of taking that exam, they'll do a MOOC with a multiple assignment throughout the whole year, the last year of high school. So this is a project that we're very proud of. So, like I said, we're now in pilot phase, and during the last year, we've learned a lot about what not to do during courses development and while courses are running, and I'm going to share 5 common mistakes that we've recognized throughout the process. So the first one is waterfalling the development process. So this is a kind of a traditional model where we perform some kind of a need assessment, write a course plan document, then we design, we develop the course content, then we put that on a platform, we go and shoot videos, produce animations, write exercises, etc. Most of the providers do some beta testing and then go to production. Now imagine that this process takes about 6 to 9 months. You spend probably no less than 100,000 euros, and then you meet your student for the first time. And what happens is, after shooting, launching the course, sometimes it works and everything's okay, but many times it doesn't work, and you find yourself with an empty wallet and a poor course online. So our lesson learned was to change that, and what we're now recommending and experimenting is taking an approach of an agile development strategy, meaning that after you write your script, you don't do the whole course development, you just do 1 unit, 2 units. You test it with you test the concept with your target audience, people that represent your target audience. Only then you go into production. You test your product again with that same group and go back to the table and the writing to make some improvements. This seems like maybe a bit of a Sisyphic process, but we believe that that's a better approach and eventually more economic approach. So my takeaway is we don't teach content, remember, we teach human students. And that's the way we believe should be approached in terms of the development. Second mistake that I want to point on is inadequate planning of the assessment strategy. And I want to share with you an example. One of the cases that we had. So we worked with the Ministry of Education about a course that is going to be targeting 200,000 students within the education system. This is a mandatory course. It's mainly based on videos and exercises, and the final grade is made of 11 quizzes. The passing grade is 70, so the students are very motivated to pass this course. So we had a few people that pushed us to just launch for the 200,000. We said, hey, let's do a pilot with a smaller number. And then we did that pilot for 250 students. It's a short course, so after a few weeks, we met with the course developers and the course staff, and they were like thrilled. They said, hey, look at the great scores. The average is like higher than 97%. And then we said, yes, you're right, but let's look into the data. And the data showed that though you have a great success at those quizzes, not too many watch the videos. Now, one thing that is important to know that you can't succeed on the quiz if you haven't watched the full video. The quiz questions are very, very informative. So 250 students taking a quiz, around less than 40 taking and watching the full videos. We had to say, guys, the students are cheating, and that's only the pilot, right? So the press conference with the Minister of Education, as you can guess, was canceled, and we were back to the production stage. So two takeaways from this case. The first one, you need to plan your assessment policy, and moreover, the implementation strategy, which was the problem here, coherent with your audience. And the other thing is do alpha testing, do beta testing, pilot your course before you're going to the mass. So, by the way, the changes that they made in the course were about the implementation strategy and not around the policy. So that's a second mistake we recommend to avoid. A third one is designing a passive learning process, which we do not recommend at all, and we see many, many times MOOCs that the very basic approach is to go for videos and other tools alike. So again, I'll share with you an example of one of the courses. So we use a template. This is our platform courses template made of section, subsection, units. Every unit is what's the content and what is the unit type. And after you fill that, you get to see what kind of pedagogical tools variety you have in your course. And looking at the chart, you can see that 77% of that course is videos. And then 7 is animation, which is also passive learning. And then 6% is text, which is also passive learning. So you get only 10% of the course of exercises. So the good thing about this was that it was before scripts were being written and before videos or animations were shot. So I want to share with you, I assume that some of you know this National Academy, American National Academy for Science Research about active learning versus passive learning. So this research took two groups studying the same course, one with active learning methodology and the other one with passive learning. And the results were, I think, quite amazing. In terms of failing the course, 34 of the passive learning group students dropped out or failed the course, and as only 22 of the ones that took the active learning approach dropped or failed. And the other thing, which is even more amazing, as I think, is that the scores, the performance of the group with active learning was 68% higher than the one who took the passive learning. So the takeaway, here again we have two takeaways. One is, and I think Anant was relating to that as well this morning, videos may be engaging, but that does not incline that this is an effective learning path. And we believe that effective learning paths should involve active learning. And the other thing is careful and rigorous planning is a crucial phase for an effective course development. And I want to share with you one of the things that we use as a protocol with our providers and customers, which includes qualitative design guidelines. We ask them to articulate what are the course goals, which is the audience type, the pedagogic model, what is the digital literacy of the audience, prerequisite, of course, success measures, etc. You'll be surprised how many providers just don't do that, or do that very partially. Second thing is the one that I've shared with you is the design skeleton that helps you really well have an outlook on your course from a high-level angle. Thirdly, assessment policy. Again, we think that the fit between the course pedagogic goals and the measurement and evaluation tools is super important. And this is a tool that helps you with that. And lastly, a production calculator that helps you manage your budget wisely. And again, according your pedagogic and content goals for the course. So, fourth thing that might go wrong, misplanning development schedule or budget. Unfortunately, fortunately, all examples, all things I'm talking about are like real cases that happened during the last year. So there's this hype expression when Harvard meets Hollywood. So looking at Hollywood, the first thing that is being published about a new feature is its date of launch, right? So we know that 3 years from today, the Avatar movie will be in cinemas. That derives back all the processes that must happen in order to get to that date. The thing is that if your star actor breaks your leg, you might need to change the plot and make shooting at a different camera angle. And this is, by the way, things that happened in the movies industry. So the planning is super important, and this is a phenomena that we face. So we have, on the one hand, the customers, it could be a university or a government ministry or an NGO, and on the other hand, the MOOC provider. Many times they don't know what they don't know because the provider is used to work with academia and not with underserved population or not with social workers. And the customers many times They don't know what digital learning is, how important marketing is, how important is experts around the content area are. So we find ourselves bridging that lost in translation process and saying, guys, help us help you. And that's a super important thing. And one of the tools we use is that Gantt chart, starting with, like the Avatar 2 movie, starting with when do you want to launch your course, and then going back to all the process, and that helps us raise a red flag throughout, updating rigorously every week where we at, and making a smart risk management. So my takeaways around this example is there are two again. First, we found out that one point of contact on the customer side, on the MOOC platform side, and on the provider side are super important and very helpful in terms of communication. The second thing is the expectation setting, the availability, and we find that most of the time the customer are the ones that are not available enough, are not responsive enough, and that cause the money, the budget to go out, or the timelines not to be met. This is literally the difference between a successful project and a failed one. And lastly, we recommend not to do a profound promise at the very beginning of your process. So I guess some of you read in the Sketch app before coming to see this session about what is going to happen here. So probably 2 months ago, I promised you I'm going to share with you the top 10 mistakes. So sorry, I didn't do that. But I don't think you're very angry. But what we see between customers and MOOC providers, sometimes the provider would sell the stars and sky and say, yeah, your MOOC is going to look like that, and we're going to have helicopters in the air and stuff like that. And then, well, budget, timelines, issues, we could see that the mutual feelings are not that good. So probably my last tip is to keep an ongoing, very frequent and open dialogue with your customers and providers, or like my favorite band, Radiohead, one of their song titles, No Alarms, No Surprises. Thank you very much, and the stage is yours now for questions. Yes.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. You said before that you use Agile, but then the planning was waterfall later on. What changes have you made? And the idea here is when you define the date for it to go on public, is that artstoned on the starting of the project, or it's only on stone once you are very sure that you'll be able to keep?
So that's actually a very good question, but because, like I said, we started with the waterfall approach. We're now experimenting around Agile, and we're developing tools around that. So hopefully next year I'll be able to share that best practice. Thanks.
So thank you for your great presentation. One advice I would have also, perhaps to complete what you said, is I had an experience recently where I helped a team put on a MOOC, and I think their expectations, as far as the number of participants, their expectations were really high, and then not even 1,000 people showed up, and then they kind of accused me and my team of not being active enough in terms of marketing and all that. So I guess my advice would be to be really clear and define who does what in a MOOC project, especially when it's the first time?
That's a great comment, and actually our team had a very interesting discussion about whose responsibilities for the marketing, because usually the customers that we work with, they have captive audience, they pay some money for some vendor to deliver the training. They don't need to convince people to go online, right? So they are not used to put money for marketing. And as we know, for online learning, that's a whole different story. So that's a great comment. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for this informative presentation. My question is, you mentioned that before you start production of the course, you need to get know your audience, like learners. How do you do that? What instruments do you use to know your audience? Do you survey them? Or
yeah, so that's another great question. Thanks. So if you remember, the first part of the course design protocol was the qualitative needs assessment. So part of that, we have like 20 different questions that we sit with the MOOC content provider and the customer, and we interview them. And relating back to the agile development approach, that's not enough. You need to meet the target audience. I'll share with you one example. So one of the courses that I mentioned before is digital literacy course. So to deliver a good online digital literacy course, we actually need to develop that 9 times, because digital literacy for the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel and the elderly population and the Arab-speaking community are going to look totally different. And we know that there are like 3 different levels. There are ones that have never touched technology. There are ones that they know how to use smartphones, but they probably don't know how to use spreadsheets. And there are ones that are kind of literate in the Microsoft Office or the Google Docs environment, but they want digital literacy, advanced digital literacy for employment. So it's designing actually 9 different courses and meeting all these audience and those different customers.
just a quick comment. So you are saying that normally you conduct a focus group, yeah, but it's challenging how representative is the focus group.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I followed your comment.
So you are saying that you have focus group, so it's like a representative of your
audience.
Potential, audience.
Right. Yeah, we work with like in an umbrella model, where, for example, if there is an NGO that focuses on advancing ultra-Orthodox underprivileged population, we use their connections and capacity to do the focus group.
Thank you, everybody. I think that's the end of this one. The next session in here is at 2:20.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This video is tonight will be.
¿Podéis seleccionar DVI en el proyector?
It's the adaptive layer. Okay, so is that it? Something we have to do? That's not what we're doing next. You HDMI? We have it. Or do you need an adapter? Oh, we need an adapter. Is it Thunderbolts or Windows? This is on the Surface. Okay. So we need mini display. Mini display port? Okay. I think we have an adapter. If you, they also have a computer here, so if you have your slides on, yeah, that might be easier. Yeah. Ready for answers?
Do you want to stay here or stay? No? Okay.
Assessment in the Harvard X course. So please give them a warm welcome.
everyone. So I'm Andrew. I'm here representing our project about implementing adaptive assessments in a Harvard X course. And this work was in part of a large team, Igal, Ilya, Glenn, Dustin from my team at VPOW Research, Colin at Harvard X, and Mary Jean Blink with TutorGen. And so this, again, this was a real collaborative effort with my organization, Harvard VPOW Research. VPOW stands for Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning. We're an educational research group that is very interested in doing educational research in both the online space and also the residential space. And our work with analyzing data from edX is a large component of that. We work very closely with Harvard X. We sit on the same floor, and we work with a lot of their course leads to implement new tools like this in their courses, and also help them analyze data that they get from their courses. And also, TutorGen is a company that we worked with for this project who had an adaptive engine that we used in this project. And the course that I'll be talking about that we implemented this system in is Super Earths in Life. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So just a general outline, I'll go over some background, give you some context for this project. I'll spend a bit of time on the implementation, and I'll tell you about some of the results that we got and some future directions for this project. So, you know, why adaptivity? Why adaptivity in MOOCs? Well, because MOOCs are massive, they're open, they're online. More so than maybe the residential classroom, you get such a large, such a large population of learners who are really diverse, and they come into the course with, different intentions, different educational background, and so adaptivity is kind of a way to help us serve these learners more effectively. And so we really want to target for each learner, we want to target them for, their level of engagement that they come into the course, whether it's they want to just come in and browse a couple of videos, or they want to completely certify and get a ID verified certificate and finish the course. Or if they're there for professional development or just there for fun. And at least and also for competency, you get people from all ages, high school students who are interested in doing advanced coursework, lifelong learners. And so it's just such a huge population and diverse population of learners. And so adaptivity is kind of a broad concept, and so the specific kind of adaptivity I'll be talking about here is problem sequences. And so this diagram shows, pretend each square is a particular problem, and the top part shows, for each student, you could imagine them getting a different sequence of problems, and that sequence is dynamically generated based on the student answers that the student has given to previous problems, and perhaps even information that we've gotten before they entered the particular sequence. And then on the bottom is a typical diagram of how problems tend to work out in traditional MOOCs. Each student gets a fixed sequence of problems that they work through. And so about the course, the course is called Super Earths and Life. It's a very cool course, a course about alien life, it's a combination of astronomy and biology, and it launched in October 2016, so this was a while ago. It's already finished. But there's a new course run that just started a few weeks ago, so you can go and take it now. The one that launched in October 2016 is version 3. So there was already a large body of content that was already produced, and HTML content, problems, and a large percentage of these problems were actually not your traditional multiple choice, but actually custom JavaScript problems. An example of which I show at the bottom. Sorry if it's so small, but it's actually a simulation, and you can adjust the sliders in order to move the lines there. And so we wanted a adaptive system that was able to keep our problem content that was authored in edX and take advantage of all the advanced problem authoring and customization features that we had in the edX platform. And so starting out, our scope was really, is this possible? We wanted to serve problems in a dynamically generated sequence, and in particular edX problems, which was actually one of the key technical challenges here. And so this project was framed as a MVP pilot study, and we wanted to learn about what did it take technologically to implement this kind of project? What were the implications for course developers in terms of how they set up the course, setting up the tool, and really establishing the foundation of some future work that we'd like to do in evaluating the effect of adaptive learning on learner outcomes, learner behavior, etc. So I'll talk a bit about the implementation and how it looks in the course. And so this is how it appears in the course. There's your typical edX course interface, and you go to an assignment, and you see, instead of seeing a bunch of problems, you see this, I call it the problem window, and it displays a single problem and gives you some little toolbar that you can, after you do the problem, you click next question, and you get a next question. And so this is kind of outlining a little bit more clearly what part is what. Like there's edX on the outside, and then you also see edX on the inside, and around it is that thin little thing is the kind of an adapter layer, the LTI tool that was embedded in the course. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the minimal UI components that we had. There was a nav bar in the upper left. It's maybe a little hard to see, but basically when you first enter this problem sequence, you see a box that says 1 on it. And once you finish the problem and get a next question, then you see right next to the 1 box, you see a 2 box, and then so on and so on. And it's set up that way because we don't actually know yet what problems we're going to give you, and even like the number of problems that we're going to give you, because this is dynamically generated based on answers that you've given us. And so once you complete part of your sequence or the whole sequence, that nav bar is a way for you to go back to previous problems that you've done before. And so on the upper right is just a running score tally, the sum of all the points that you've earned in that sequence. On the bottom left is a shareable link. This is just the link to the XBlock URL for the problem, and its intention is, if students have, if they have a question, they can copy and paste this link and put it on the forum, and they can get help. And the reason why we did that is because you don't actually have like a static URL that you can reference. And then on the bottom left is the next question button. Once the student submits the problem, they get their problem graded, and then they click the next question to get a next question. And so we wanted, in the style of a typical scientific experiment, we wanted to separate our learners into two groups so that we could evaluate the effect of adding the adaptivity to the course. And so we had an experimental group on the top and a control group on the bottom. And the experimental group is the one that had the adaptive interface shown to them. And the control group just had, in a traditional way, say like 4 or 5 problems that were just vertically on the page. And the implications for course design were actually quite tricky to figure out in order to accommodate having a control and experimental group. We ended up utilizing the content experiment functionality of the platform, where in, say, the A group, which was the control group, we put the problems that would be the problems that they saw, but also the problems that they might not necessarily see, but the adaptive cohort might actually see in that in those content experiment blocks. And then in the B group, we actually didn't put any problems there. Instead, we inserted a LTI tool in there. And so what the LTI tool tracks is a bunch of XBlock URLs, and it actually draws from that A group and draws the XBlock URL in there. And so here's like the A group, and then on the top is the B group. And so there's 3 components in play here. One is edX, the LMS. There's also the adaptive engine, which I'll tell you about later. And then there's the LTI tool, which kind of acts as the shuttle between the LMS and the adaptive engine. One thing that I might point out is if you see between edX and the LTI tool, there's an arrow labeled data. And that was actually a kind of a technical challenge for us. How do we, all this adaptive functionality is prefaced on being able to get real-time problem data out of the platform. And so the way we did it is we embedded a bit of JavaScript in all of the problems in the course, not just the problems used for adaptivity, but all the introductory problems as well, even in the control group. And so what this piece of JavaScript does is once you click submit, it actually waits for the grading functionality to grade the problem. And then it's a bit of a hack, but it's what we have to do. We actually just read the score off the page and looked at whether the CSS styles looked like, whether it was like right or wrong. And then based on that, we make a API call to an endpoint that we implement on the LTI tool. So it wasn't actually through the LTI protocol, but rather just a regular API post. And it sends it to our adaptivity web application, which was built with Django and hosted on AWS using Elastic Beanstalk. On the other side was the adaptive engine. This was provided by TutorGen. It's called Scale, Student-Centered Adaptive Learning Engine, and it uses a variant of Bayesian knowledge tracing to make the activity recommendations. And so the way that we interact with it is they implement 2 API endpoints that we can hit. We can post a transaction, which means basically we send them a message that is something like, here's student 6. They got problem 3 right, and with a timestamp. And then we keep sending them these transactions asynchronously. And then whenever students click the next activity button, then that means TutorGen calculates based on its current model, current state, current data that it knows about the students, which activity is right for them. And it does it based on, we've tagged all the problems with learning objectives, and kind of behind the scenes, the basic idea of Bayesian knowledge tracing is to kind of keep track of a parameter for, for each student and each learning objective, what's the probability that they've mastered that learning objective? And it keeps them all in kind of a, conceptually, it's kind of like a matrix, and updates these parameters based on the real-time data that it gets. And so to maybe dive a little bit into the details of what actually happens behind the scenes when someone clicks a next question. So in the X block, well, first I'll talk about what happens when they submit an answer to a question. Student checks the answer. The JavaScript detects the score. It makes the API call to our app backend, and then we store that information in our database, and then we forward it on to TutorGen. The reason why we kind of act as this middleman is because we need to keep track of running tallies of scores for displaying that UI stuff and keeping track of that score. And we also need to keep track of the score in order to do a grade pass back afterwards. And then, so we store that data, and then when they request the next question, so a student clicks next question on the nav bar, then we send a request to the adaptive engine that says, we have this student, which question should they do next? And then we get a response. They're like, question 4. And so then we keep track of a mapping that says, oh, question 4 means this XBlock URL. And then we go ahead and serve that XBlock URL inside the problem window, just with a regular iframe. And the reason why that works is because typically if you iframe in some piece of edX content, say like a XBlock, you won't actually, you'll get some error saying, oh, you're not authenticated or you're not allowed to see this. But because they're already logged into the course in that outer edX context, then that iframing in works because you're already logged into the course if you're using this tool. And so, yeah, we serve them the XBlock and then they do the next question. So now some results. So even though this was a pretty, meant as a proof of concept, we actually got some pretty useful data out of this. And I'll give you a sense of the takeaways first and then take you through some graphs. So something, to me, which was a little bit unexpected, was so we didn't actually see a difference in learning gains, but rather we saw something that we kind of interpreted as efficiency of learning. Say, what I mean by that is students tended to do less, students in the experimental group who experienced adaptivity got less questions, but they still showed the same amount of learning gain from the from pre to post course. And then some other takeaways were, on the technological side, getting real-time student activity and interfacing with all these different components that need to know this was a challenge. And also more on the course setup and course development side, implementing adaptivity in a course requires actually a lot of work on the content side. That is, you need to have a large amount of new content in order to actually draw from and serve students the right kind of problem, and doing the learning objective tagging as well. And so this first graph shows the orange is the experimental group who experienced adaptivity, and the blue is the control group who just got a regular sequence of questions. And this shows the difference in from the pre-test to the post-test, which we interpret as learning gains that you had because you took this course. And so it's increased for both groups, but the difference between the pre and post, comparing between the groups, was actually not significantly different, which means we didn't like screw up their learning experience. And so the interesting stuff comes when you start looking at, say, like attempts per problem or problems per user. Here, this shows pretty clearly that students make more attempts per problem. And at first, I was a little taken aback. You could interpret this in a couple of ways. One might be, like if they need more attempts per problem, are they having a harder time, right? But the idea here is that they're getting a problem that's a little bit more suited to their current mastery level of that learning objective. And presumably they might be getting harder problems. And so they are, I guess, need more attempts for it and feel you could interpret it as persistence and they're being more engaged. And at the same time, the number of problems that they attempt per module or in the course actually decreases for people who had adaptivity. And so this is where we started to think about efficiency of learning. You are having the same learning gains pre and post course, but you're doing less problems to get that same learning gain. So, and presumably spending less time on the course as well. So some future directions for this course, for this project. So the first major direction that we are taking with this is trying to generalize out the content source interface. And what I mean by that is you can imagine instead of that two component thing where you're interfacing with the LMS and then you have a bridge in between, and on the bottom you have the adaptive engine. Try abstracting out the content source, because we were actually interacting with the content source quite independently, really, of all the LMS specific stuff. And so you could imagine this is also related to some of the JavaScript issues that I was telling you about before, where instead of embedding some piece of JavaScript that read the UI content, which may not be ideal due to future UI changes that you might have heard about in a previous workshop, and also because the JavaScript call sometimes, depending on the user's browser settings, users may just block JavaScript, or because it's making a cross-origin domain call, it looks like a security risk or something. And so we've seen instances like less than 1% where this JavaScript call actually fails. And so this is something that we'd like to fix by actually, as our content source, using OpenEdX as a LTI provider. So we come from edX, or maybe even OpenEdX, and inside the problem window, they're actually seeing content possibly from a different platform. And then you can abstract this out even more. Say instead of OpenEdX, you could use this with other external components. Again, the three components are the LMS, the adaptive engine, and the content source. And so you could imagine there's a set of code that's kind of common to all of this, but there's also interface-specific parts of the code that you could write for individual LMS, individual or different content sources and different adaptive engines. And from the perspective of trying to study adaptive learning, something that we want to do is to kind of interface with multiple adaptive engines and try out different algorithms to see which one kind of works the best. And I guess streamlining course integration and setting up this experiment was actually quite a bit of work and technical work at that. And so we'd like to move towards streamlining this whole process of setting up a course to enable adaptivity. And one possibility might be implementing like a API or UI for say course developers to interact with in order to manage the problems that they have and the learning objectives that are associated with those. And so we are already actually deploying this in the next run of Super Earths in Life, which started just a couple of weeks ago. So you should take it and try out this adaptive functionality for yourself. And we're actually also partnering with Microsoft to test out this, an improved version of the adaptivity bridge and also our own adaptive engine in 2 of their courses, Data Science Essentials and their Excel course. And finally, so as part of this effort, we're trying to organize like a small open source adaptive learning workshop. And so this project, the LTI tool that I told you about in this talk is all open source. I actually forgot the GitHub URL, but you can go there and look at my bag code. And so the workshop is next week, and you can join in person if you're in the Boston area, or virtually via Skype. It's 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. EST. And you can contact my colleague, Yigal Rosen, if this is something that's interesting to you. So that's all I have. So we'll have to take questions.
So just to understand how you integrate this into the course, very usually we have, with the content, with the videos, very usually we have, week 1 videos and then exercise 1, then week 2 exercise 2 weeks, and I suppose you don't mix exercises from different weeks, based on different content. So is this just for one piece of content, or do you do this for every week with a bunch of problems that students have to do?
Sure. So there were, I guess, 16 units in this course. We implemented, because this was kind of like a proof of concept, we implemented this adaptive functionality in 4 of those 16 modules. And for each of those 4 assignments, they were implemented in assignments that came at the end of the module. And for each of those assignments, they all drew from a separate kind of library of problems for each of those 4. So there was a set of, say, 10 to 20 questions for module 1, a totally independent set of questions for module 2, etc. And you could imagine maybe they could draw from the same content library, or you could define kind of partially overlapping subsets. And so, but this was just how we implemented it for this course.
And do you plan to have some adaptivity also to the content, like depending on what the student answers, you are sent back to some extra lecture or whatever.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that's a really exciting direction, and actually, because the way that we showed the content was through Xbox URLs. I mean, pieces of content are Xbox and have Xbox URLs as well. And actually, we did do some content display in this implementation. Problems were tagged with either easy, medium, or hard based on their difficulty. And for some of the more advanced questions, there was some associated content for that question. And so the way that we implemented it was that if the adaptive engine determined that, oh, you should be seeing this advanced content, we'd actually show you the complementary piece of content before that. And the way it looked, I don't think I had a picture in this deck, but in the nav bar, if you encountered a HTML content block instead of a problem, it would color it blue to kind of indicate that that was a HTML content, to make it easier for you to find.
Why did you choose to do the implementation as an LTI tool and not like a platform feature? And the subsidiary question to that is, are you aware that there is actually an implementation as a platform feature coming up? So how do you plan to interact with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen some of the work that OpenCraft has done for the adaptive XBlock. Although I think the challenge was first, or maybe to give a bit of context, before this project, I was actually working on a separate LTI project for Canvas, our residential learning system. And so it was, maybe it was a little bit trivial, but it was just a more, maybe more familiar way of implementing it for me. But also, we anticipate from that I was showing in this slide, trying to expand this to use in other systems, other LTI compliant systems like Canvas, which we use residentially. And so we'd like the work that we do here to also kind of flow back into our group's interest in residential learning as well. Great. Well, thank you.
Thank everybody. And then the next session starts in here after that at 3:30. breakout session. We'll have there's a keynote afterwards in the main auditoriums. But I'd like to introduce Alden Carr. He's going to be talking about Open edX on Azure. So please give him a warm welcome.
So I get to clap for myself as well, right? I can do that. Hi, my name is Elton, and I work with the Learning and Readiness team of Microsoft. And we've been working on the concept of delivering Microsoft Azure, to deliver Open edX on Microsoft Azure. Today, we're here to share the experiences we've gained as part of this delivery. And we're also going to be talking about the thinking behind the designs that we've had. As well as that, we're going to also talk about the tools that we've used. And at the very end of the session, we're going to at least deliver those tools so you too can use them, because that's our purpose here. The intention is, we believe that hosting an enterprise-grade instance of Open edX on Microsoft Azure is not only possible, but it can be seamlessly done, right? Plus, I think it makes a lot of financial sense as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's get started. The very first thing I want you to realize here, let's get started here. In this slide, you see this is the architecture of Open edX. That's the current architecture of Open edX, and there are a couple of things that will stand out. I did a quick check in the edX platform source, and you realize that there's a lot of AWS references in there. I counted, at least when I counted, was 163. Here in the analytics source code, it runs much higher than that. All right. So the first impression you start to get is, does this thing work on Azure to begin with? All right. The next thing you want to look at, if you look at the architecture here, you see that there are a lot of components that are used, and they are all exclusively open source components. You don't see components that are coming out of the Microsoft stack. So it begins to the question, does this thing work on Microsoft Azure? And our answer to that is pretty straightforward. Yes, we believe it works on Microsoft Azure, and we're going to establish how these things are. So first of all, most people don't realize that Azure is an open cloud, and here is a grid that shows the various components that Azure supports. And there are two key concepts I want you to realize. Number one, Azure offers choice and flexibility. So that allows you to choose the various components and have the flexibility to bring various components together to build your solution as well. Here is an additional piece that most people don't realize. Microsoft also offers a very compelling cost model where we support a per minute billing for services, per minute billing, as opposed to hourly or daily billing for resource utilization, as well as we provide a price match commitment on certain services. So everything you see here these are services that will run on the Microsoft Azure cloud. Not only that, we also went ahead and we built a solution. We built a solution with the L&R team that takes advantage of Microsoft openness and flexibility. And that's what we did here. Between December 2016 and 2017, we actually had a full deployment of the Open edX Dogwood version, and we actually upgraded it in March of this year to the latest version, which is FICUS release. And all of the tools and the learnings and everything, we're going to talk about that here in a minute. And moreover, we've made those tools available so whoever else wants to bootstrap such a system will have the tools in his or her hand to do the exact same thing that we did. There is a site that we're hosting right now, openedx.microsoft.com. That's a production site, and we have a number of courses already imported in there. And the same platform is used for employee training as well. We have a version of it that supports using the Open edX sites feature. So we're consuming this ourselves. It's not something we're suggesting that you do or that we are not doing ourselves, but rather the exact same tools that we're using, we're making that available for everybody else to jump in and use the exact same thing. All right, so the next thing, before going to a production system, there are a couple of key design considerations. And now we're about to discuss what are some of the things that drove our decision and the way it ended up being, right? So we start with the key design consideration. For a production system, right now, Open edX provides full dev stack installs and full stack installations, and these things usually run on single VMs, and they're excellent. You get started in a couple of minutes and you can have a full installation running, but it's a single VM. Now, I don't know if anybody here will run a production system on a single VM. I don't even think that is an advisable thing to do. You don't even want to start with that, because if you lose that VM, your entire application is down. Moreover, I don't know if the single VM would take maybe 1 million requests coming in, right? So how well does it scale? These are things that you have to consider. So we factor that into our calculation here. When we talk about systems that have to be put in production, they have to have high availability. They have to have high scalability, options to scale up your system. You also have to consider like disaster recovery. What happens if some data corruption happens, right? What do you do in those cases? So, and in addition to that, what about monitoring? What is your application doing? What exactly are people doing on your system? Is there somebody hacking your system or generating a lot of traffic on it? These are the key considerations that we must put into designing a production system. And because we've designed one, we also had to grapple with those same questions. And here is what we did. Because OpenEdX provides a great way to handle configuration, we decided to go with a major configuration effort. And what we did was to go ahead and fork various repositories that edX provides. So we made our own forks, and then we applied customizations to those forks. And moreover, we developed a brand new, from scratch, deployment utility that allows us to deploy the system very highly configurable, and we can deliver what we want to deliver. For example, we can make customizations to maybe the platform code in our own branch, maybe, and then we can have a deployment that uses that branch value as a parameter, and then we can use source that comes from that branch with your customization in it. So that allows us to make customizations, and once we release the details here, you too can make customizations on our customizations, make that available to the public, and somebody else can take the customizations you made and also make customizations on them. But we make allowance for these things, and they all have been boiled down to parameters that can be plugged into a system, and we just deploy. And the way we do that also is we've made a full advantage of something called the Azure Resource Manager. And that allows, this is how Azure now promotes the concept of deployment. So with the Azure Resource Manager, this construct was introduced back in, I think it was built 2015. And in that session, what the concept was, describe your entire infrastructure in a JSON file, mapping all of the dependencies, for example, your storage units, your VMs, your application VMs, your network. You can describe every piece of your infrastructure in a JSON format, and you can deploy that JSON format. At the end of it, we're going to provision all of that within 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, you can have your entire infrastructure provision, and then we layer on the configuration that edX requires, like the playbooks, because that's a two-part process. You provision all your resources, and you apply whatever playbooks you have to it, and then you're done. Applying the playbooks is the longer part of it, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but from the provisioning perspective, 15 minutes, no more than that. You have your full infrastructure provision. Even if you are meant to maybe build an infrastructure that has support for maybe 1 million requests per second, it's a configuration parameter, you pop it in, you get 5, maybe application VMs. If you want more, you can get more. We also allow options for scaling up and scaling down automatically, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So these things give full support for high availability. Not only that, you can have the application automatically scale up for you and also automatically scale down based on your utilization parameters that you put in. So these are options that we have concerning deployment. And all of this is available on Azure. So I'll just talk right to this slide right here. So there are a combination of tools that we're using here. Number one is on Azure. We're deploying to the Azure cloud. Number two, we're using Resource Manager. And then to wrap all of this up, we have also leveraged PowerShell. I don't know how many people use PowerShell here, but PowerShell is just as equipped as your bash session. I will actually argue a little bit more. The reason is, from PowerShell, you can consume your C# libraries. So if you have your C# code or whatever, you can call them directly from PowerShell. But in this case, we're not using C# code here. We're just using ARM templates, and we're using PowerShell, putting the two together and deploying them. And speaking of the Resource Manager, I will just explain a little bit here. Azure provides multiple options for deployment using the Resource Manager. Number one, you can deploy using command line. So they provide a command line interface that you can use to deploy. You type a parameter in there, and you specify your template that you're using, and it's just going to deploy that particular system for you using command line. Two, Azure also provides REST API. So you can actually deploy your entire infrastructure using pure API calls. That is also possible. And also, you can call those same templates using PowerShell, which is what we use. And additionally, Azure provides the option, you can go directly to the Azure portal, and you can provision your entire infrastructure and have that set up as well. Now, the reason we have a preference for maybe the PowerShell option, it allows more customization. And we also are pushing now, because of a simplification effort, we're pushing towards supporting the Azure management portal to use that approach, the marketplace. Basically, you need no other tool. You log into your Azure subscription, you click on a link, takes you to the Azure portal, you provision your site, come back a couple of hours, 2 hours actually, and we'll talk about that. 2 hours later, you have a fully functional production-grade Open edX installation within 2 hours. So these are the options that we have, and right now we're promoting both the PowerShell option and the marketplace option. So next, I will just describe the process that we go through here. I'll describe the process here. Number one, we expect that you have your Azure subscription, right? You have to have a subscription provision and has some resources in it, support for provisioning multiple VMs in there. And then the second part of the process is your configuration. So we have a set of configurations that the system needs, and we've captured all of them in such a way they're all in one configuration file, 1 or 2 configuration file, and with a couple of changes to those configuration files, you can have your customizations done. For example, the entire infrastructure that we built has 2 entry points, and I will show you the architecture in a little bit here. It has 2 entry points, like we only allow front door access to the application using HTTPS, and we also allow for administrative purposes SSH-only access. Now, for security reasons, we've limited the SSH access to only SSH keys. So once you're bootstrapping, we highly recommend you don't use one of the shared keys. You generate your own SSH key, because you alone have it. You alone have access to your infrastructure. We also ask that you provide maybe your SSL certificate. These are not things that we can provide for you, right? You have your own domain, and you want your SSL certificate that matches that domain. But beyond that, we provide configuration files that tells us which repository to pull your source from and bring in your various customizations. That's what we have in there. Once you have all of the configurations in place, the only thing that's left is to deploy. And the deployment process is as simple as push a button, run a command, passing the parameters that you have in there, basically 2 parameters, your deployment file and the templates that we'll share in a minute here, and that's it. You step back, a couple of minutes later, well, actually 2 hours later, if you're counting hours as minutes, which is like 120 minutes anyway, that counts to a full stamp that is set up. And we call it a stamp because it's like a cluster setup where everything is contained in one unit, which is the resource manager, and all of the resources you need will be in that particular unit. So in this next slide, I just talk about what the deployment process looks like. This is just an overview of the process. So we start with provisioning resources using an ARM template that we'll share here in a minute. With the ARM template, you have all the description of all of the resources that you need for your entire cluster. That takes about 10, 15 minutes, no more than that, and then you're done. Next, as part of the provisioning process, we also provision a jump box. It's just a utility machine that you use for administrative purposes. You can log into the box, and you have access to the rest of the resources in your cluster. And now here is one important part of this, because this comes from a security focus. Linux machines they're very powerful, and if you don't lock them down sufficiently, you're going to have a security nightmare on your hands, right? So what we've done is we've limited access to all of the resources within your cluster, and the only entry point for administrative purposes is through your jump box. And you can only access that through your SSH key. From the jump box, we use it to go ahead and install the databases, and we apply the edX configurations to those databases as part of the process. That usually takes about maybe an hour, maybe 30, 45 minutes, and it's done. And then we have the VMSS. This is what we call the virtual machine skill set. That's what Azure provides. And how it works is you hand configuration for one VM, and that VM now can be multiplied into like 10 or 15, depending on what your need is. So if you need a cluster that has 200 front ends, in your template, you specify 200 front ends, and it will provision 200 front ends within the 15 minutes. If you need less, you take less. Moreover, you have options to say, I want to use auto-scaling. There is a feature with the VMSS called auto-scaling, where with auto-scaling, you can specify, here's the minimum number of VMs I want at any time in my cluster. So for example, I want to start a production cluster with maybe 3 front ends, but based on requests coming into the site, I want to scale up to 25, as much as 25, right? All of that is set in configurations, and we have those files available. You can make those changes, and The system takes care of all of that for you. So the VMSS will be provisioned at the very beginning of the process, but it will wait until the databases are installed, because the way the application works, the front end depends on the back end. So the application doesn't really bootstrap correctly until the backends are available, because they have to read certain things from the databases and they have to write certain things to the databases. So our deployment process actually puts that into a pipeline, and we set up the dependency such that the VMSS will wait until the backends are done. And once they're done, then the bootstrap for the front end starts. That takes about 45 to an hour, and then it's done. So combined, no more than 2 hours, or total of, on average, I've seen maybe 105 minutes on average, once you have your configurations in place. That's how long it takes to go from zero in your hand to a fully functional production system. And that is something critical that we want to establish here. So that's what we have concerning the deployment process. Next up, this is what we actually deliver. This is an architecture of the system, the cluster that we deliver for you. And within that cluster, a couple of key components I'd just like to call out here. Number one, you see the dotted lines around there? That's a virtual network, and it's a private network, so nobody has access. Those machines don't even have a public-facing IP, so nobody can access them. It's just not possible. The only machines with access to public endpoints would be like your jump box, which we just talked about. And then you have a load balancer traffic manager that allows us, for example, in a production system, you're going to have one update today, and maybe tomorrow you want to have another update. So we allow you to bootstrap brand new virtual IPs and put machines behind them in a load balancer and then swap them in place. The swap itself takes about maybe 10 seconds, and you can actually upgrade your installation. So I tell you this because we had to use it going from Dogwood version to FICAs. We use this. So this is not something that we're suggesting that you do that we haven't done ourselves. We actually use this stuff. So what you have with the front ends is you have public IPs on them, and that's how you access the application. So your www. Whatever your domain is, that's where they will come in from. And then your jump box for administrative purposes, and all SSH logging in there, and you can have access to your MySQL cluster. We have a MySQL cluster that is already configured for you. That's available. We also have a Mongo replica set that is already configured for you. So none of this stuff you have to do. It's all part of the configuration system that are displayed in the previous slide, right here. You see the second line where you have the provisioning of the backends? That's where all of that happens. We create them, we configure them, and then they're ready to go. Not only that, we talk about disaster recovery as well. We also do automatic by configuration. You can specify the frequency of your backups. So, but by default, we do that for you. We put in defaults, and so even if you don't think about it, you have a backup for your system. You don't have to think much about it. Your system is going to be backed up at least once daily, or maybe multiple times during a day. So you have that data available. So here is the cluster that we define and we deliver for you, and that's what you get out at the very end of it. Next, that is a big question. How do I get started on this, right? And this is the endpoint that we've given here. We try to use this as a landing page for you. We try to capture as much documentation as is possible on that site, because from that site, you can now have access. For example, we have a PDF documentation there that describes all of the various processes that you have to go through to build maybe the inputs that you need. Also, we give you documentation, video documentation, so we can actually walk you through what the process is. Here is how to get this. Here is how to get that. We have 3 video links on that site as well, and this is on GitHub. So from here now, with that link, you also have access to there are 2 deployment types that we put in there. Number 1, to deploy using the Azure management portal through the marketplace. Once you click on the link, it gives you a page that has various inputs on it, and then you can now provision your cluster, put in parameters in there, and then provision your cluster. So that's how this entire process runs. And one key thing I would like to call out is that our goal right now, this is version 2 of it. We've had to use it, and there were some pain points that we had to deal with, so this is a version 2. The next part that we're trying to work on is to simplify the process, because there are a little bit of parameters that we need. Some of them we cannot get away from. For example, if you want to use your custom theming repository, for example, because that's the most highly requested item that we've had so far. Somebody has his own theme, and he wants to use his theme. It comes down to a configuration update. You point to your theming repository, and we will deploy it for you. Or maybe you have some customizations in your application, the way the application works, That's another input parameter, and these things are all available, and you can just make those changes in there. And basically, that's what we wanted to cover today, and we can start taking the questions, and we can dig deeper. Great. Go ahead. Oh, hang on. No, right now we don't. And you realize that it wasn't, I think it was at the recent Build Conference, 2017. That's when they actually started to publish this. And when we started this work, there was even a beta version of the MySQL available, MySQL and Cosmos. So that's part of our version 3 that we're trying to work on, because we want to further simplify the process where we can utilize Cosmos DB for a Mongo setup, and then the Azure MySQL database, we want to use that as well. Right now, what we do is, on the fly, we provision the machine, and we set all of that up for you. And that's what we have. Yep. Somebody else had a question? Yep. Yep.
Let's say that I have my own development, because I have lots of BlockX and some customizations, and I have to put this on GitHub, so that you then download there, right? Should we have also a pre-production cloud instance, so that I can try my developments on something else? How do you see this? How,
you can. So the way it works right now, the resource manager captures all of your resources. So with a single cloud, what we do for ourselves, we use the same templates, and we deploy multiple clouds. So maybe one cloud will have maybe one VM in it, front-end VM. That's what we provision in there. For a production cloud, we have much more VMs in there. So we do both of them, right? So in your case, yes, you can do that. You just deploy it, and you have a scaled-down version of it, and you can use that for your test environment. And for your production environment, you can change the parameters that you deploy with. And that's the key thing I want to establish here. It's very highly configurable. The biggest debate that we've had is, how many of these parameters do we expose to users? That was the big conversation as part of our design consideration. Because there's so much of this thing that you can configure. There's so much of it that you can change. But we had a limit and say, we can give you some reasonable defaults to work with. And once you have mastered the process, you can go in for deeper integrations. Like you're saying, you have your source, maybe some customizations in a different repository. It's a config change. You specify which repository you want. There are I think 5 repositories that we use: edX platform, edX configuration, those various repositories. You can just point to them and say, here is the repository I want to use. Here is the version of that repository, meaning the branch that I want to use, and deploy this. And it's going to deploy that for you. If you don't like it, go right back into Azure portal and just hit delete. It will delete all of the resources for you, because it's all contained in a single unit.
Question. Let's say that in 2 years I want to move out of this cloud. Is there a way to export data?
So by default, Mongo, we don't provide that tool out of the box. There are some inherent risks. We did a migration as well, the migration from Dogwood to Ficus. We did that as well. But we haven't released that, because there are a number of nuances involved in the process. So, and it's a bit risky, but it is possible. There are tools available like the database. We actually provide you the backup. So already, by default, you already have backups that you can replay in other environments or restore in other environments, and you can bootstrap those environments with the data from there. So it is possible. Okay.
You said that currently you're not able to do SSL certificates automatically. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
So currently you're not able to do SSL certificates automatically. Have you thought about using Let's Encrypt?
No, for the SSL certificate, we are not going to create your SSL certificate. We have a default SSL certificate, so if you want to try it out, you can start out with that. But here's the problem. We don't know your domain of your site. So it's not technically possible for us to provision your SSL certificate. You have to buy your certificate from your certificate authority and then use that as an input parameter. That way, for example, you have a site called maybe y.com. I don't know who has the domain y.com. You have your certificate that supports y.com, and you specify it as an input parameter, say, here is the certificate I want my application servers to use. Once you're accessing the site on HTTPS, because the domain matches, then it's going to work. Otherwise, it will complain you have invalid certificate on the site.
But you could also use the domain name as an input variable and use Let's Encrypt certbot to automatically get a verified SSL certificate for that.
We could. And that's something that we may have to consider. I'm not sure if we're at the point we have the request to do that, but that's something to factor into the equation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry if I'm asking this again because, so what you just said now, if you're moving from Dogwood to Ficus, if you move to another, so if we deploy something once and we want to update our edX platform base, would that be supported as a part of your solution, like the migration of data?
So data migration is a very difficult thing because of the inherent risks involved. Okay, so right now we're not trying to insert ourselves in that equation. There are some things that we can suggest to you, right? But it is very difficult. So in our case, we had to do a lot of hand-holding to get that. It's a whole team effort that was involved in that, and the validations and everything else, because you have to maintain data integrity while you do this. And moreover, we set a goal for ourselves. We have full availability throughout the deployment. So our site never went down while we migrated. We migrated fully while the site was still running. We had to do that. That was a high bar we set for ourselves. Would that work for your case? I'm not quite sure, right? So that's the reason why we're not even the guys, and there's a whole team effort here that work towards that. They're not here to maybe talk about that. Maybe in a subsequent session we can do that. But right now the thing is, for data migration, you're mostly left on your own. There are some suggestions we can give to you to do that. For example, backing up your databases and restoring it. In the case of the Mongo setup, you can add another replica into it, right? And you can have a backup and stand up your cluster doing that and move them from maybe one OS to another version of the OS. You could do things like that. Yep, go ahead.
So after using your template to set up the cluster and it's ready and up and running, how do I then plug in my continuous integration pipeline? Say if I'm managing it with Circle CI, how do I then plug in that to make sure that I'm able to
So this is what we call the upgrade path, right? And this is part of our effort at simplification. We haven't exposed that yet, right? But it's available. We're working on that, and we ourselves are using it. Our deployment process looks like this. We go in and we bootstrap a brand new set of front ends, and we put them in a VIP, right? In a load balancer, and then we do our validations against them. Once we have validated everything is good, we simply tell let me just, is there a way to get the slides back and I can speak to it? Whoever's in the control room, can we switch back to the slides? Okay, so if you see in the slide here, that's the reason why we have those two components out there outside of the cluster that are available. You have the load balancer, where you have your multiple VMs that are represented there. They're load balanced in there. And then you have the traffic manager. Traffic manager is basically an Azure construct for DNS rerouting. So basically, with one command, I can switch from one load balancer to another load balancer that has the latest updates. For example, at one point in time in our production system, we had a load balancer that had Dogwood bits, front ends with Dogwood. And then we deployed the Ficus bits. They were all running together at the same time, but users will only see the Dogwood version. Once we were satisfied with all of the requirements, we switched using the traffic manager, and then we switched over, and then we tore down the rest of the other machines. We just disposed of them because we didn't need them anymore. So that's how you will go forward with regular updates. So your Circle CI you're using, you're most probably going to hook up into a full deployment. And the way ARM works, it does what we call catch-up upgrades. So for example, if you've already deployed a component, it smartly looks in there and says, this component is already deployed, so therefore I'm not going to do anything more. So in order to get the various customizations you need in there, Azure provides something called the script extension, the custom script extension. It's not in the visual here, but through the custom script extension, that's where you can run your upgrade commands. So for example, you want to run certain playbooks, You'll call them through there. If you want to provision brand new machines and have them do certain things, that's how you'll do those things. So upgrade approach is possible, and we'll most probably be coming with a fuller solution around there, at least something that third party can use, because we are currently using that for our deployments. I think right before coming here, we have some pending upgrades. We go through them all the time. As we see a change that we need to deploy, we deploy them. So that's what we're using, and then we have to package it in a way that third parties can use them as well. So that's the goal. That will be our version 3. And just keep tracking the GitHub site, the link that we give, and we'll have those available in there as well. Yep. Sorry. That's fine.
Did you say that the edX platform repository is one of the things that can be passed into your configuration?
That is correct.
So then are you tied to any specific version of OpenEdX, or how do you regulate that? If I send you, as part of my configuration, a link to a repository that is not, let's say it's not Ficus, it's Eucalyptus.
Yep.
You handle that the same way?
It's just a configuration parameter. Here is where we started. We started with Dogwood. And I don't know if I can really talk about this just in a little. I'm looking at the managers here. But the plan initially was to go to Eucalyptus, not even Ficus, right? And we had tested the capability to both deploy Dogwood, Eucalyptus, and Ficus. The reason why I went ahead with this design was it's very possible to have any platform deployed, okay? Once you have the correct inputs and the parameters, you point to the right places, it should take care of that. So it's very flexible. It will deploy Dogwood because we had to deploy Dogwood. It will deploy Eucalyptus because we tested against Eucalyptus, even though we didn't release on Eucalyptus, but it will definitely deploy Ficus because that's what we do right now. So it will handle it.
Sorry, I'll shut up after this. Any specific version of Ficus or Eucalyptus or Dogwood, or all of them?
Is version agnostic. Let's call it that.
Okay.
The only input we need is tell me where your repository is, and we point to the playbooks against that repository. It doesn't matter what version is on. We're going to execute those playbooks. That's it. Okay. Excellent. And of course, because Ficus required Ubuntu 16.04. Again, another configuration parameter. You specify which OS of Ubuntu you want, you get it. Yep, there's someone here.
My question is, where do you run the other persistent service that OpenEdX use, like Elasticsearch and Memcache? Because on the architecture that you displayed, you have the Mongo and MySQL, and then the application services.
So right now, and this is a conversation we're having as well. That's a design change that we're contemplating right now. Right now, Elasticsearch is applied to one of our backend databases, right? That's where it's set right now. But we now want to leverage the search capabilities of OpenEdX. So now we're contemplating spinning it off as a separate service. That's a conversation we're having right now. Here's the great thing. And all of our work is done right in those GitHub repositories. Once those designs are done, the template is made available. We're going to deploy from those templates. And if you deploy from the template, you get exactly what we got. Seems like we've exhausted the questions. And that's fine, because the effort here, we're driving towards simplicity. And I think our version 3 is going to be much simpler than what it is now. Right now, as it is, you have a number of input parameters. We're trying to really compress them as much as possible, and huge debates, because we want a highly configurable system. We want you to be able to change whatever you want to change and still have the deployment system deliver that for you. But at the same time, if you put too much in there, too much becomes a problem. But if you put too little, that becomes very restrictive in what you can do. So we have to find this fine balance and then improve on our tools, various pieces in there. Those are the things that we're targeting. Those are the things that we're driving right now. Are we running out of time? No, there's somebody else coming up.
So given this is a relatively new journey that you guys are going on, what kind of support would you give to anyone who is going to set on this journey with you?
Yeah, that is a catch-99 situation right there. Now, so my skip level manager is here. She's going to be talking a little, I think tomorrow, she's going to be talking about that, about something within something around our partner play. So we do have a partner play. So right now we don't openly support, just provide open support for anybody who wants to do anything with these templates. That's why we try to provide as much documentation as possible, and moreover, simplify to the point where, I mean, how many people here have a problem typing up on a Word document? Right? Just to type a couple of words on a Word document. It's pretty simple. You start up the app and you just start typing. That's how simple we want this cluster setup to be. And that's the goal. That's what we're driving towards. Everywhere we can simplify so that you don't have that extra question. Of course, you may have a question or something. So we'll provide a GitHub, and if there is a way to contact us through there, we can provide that. And of course, I didn't tell you, but my alias was on the first screen of my presentation. So if you caught that, I'm putting my neck on the line here, right? Just what you do. And we can display it. I can just provide it right now. And I'm hanging myself here. I understand that, right? I understand that, but I agree with your question here. Let's just do this, and I'll just provide it for a couple of seconds here. Just preface the subject with maybe Open edX conference, whatever, right? And then so I would know, because guess what? We all use filter rules, believe it or not. So I'll have a filter rule that will point your email to come to a certain place, and then we'll respond to them within reasonable time. But besides that, the focus is, can you do this with minimal intervention? That's the goal. If we can simplify sufficiently and get you on your way so you don't have to depend on somebody else to get it done for you, that's where we wanted to go. Okay? That was the last question. All right.
And the last session, so thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So thank you guys all for coming. There is another keynote in the main auditorium, so if you guys want to make your way there, and then after that is the reception. So thank you, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
All right.